You are listening to the global network of podcasters dedicated to the pharmacy profession. Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
Adverse drug reactions, or ADRs, are a serious issue in healthcare today. The pharmacist is the last line of defense to help prevent ADRs. A rising role of the pharmacist is the specialist who focuses on our children. Pediatric pharmacy ensures safe and effective drug use and optimal medication therapy outcomes in children up to 18 years of age. Currently, there are more than 1,450 board-certified pediatric pharmacy specialists, known as BPS. If you're interested in this expanding field of pharmacy, this podcast is for you. All right, everyone, let's give it up for our host.
Hey, listeners, welcome back to the Pediatric Pharmacist Review. I am one of your co-hosts, Justin Cole, and I'm excited to have Jenna Quinn back with me today. Jenna, it's been a minute.
It has been. We've been really ramping up over here at Perfecting Peds with going from hundreds of patients, like 500 to now 5,000. So because of that, I've had my head down focusing on scaling this bad boy with our amazing Perfecting Peds staff. But Mary, my chief of staff, is absolutely fabulous because I can throw her in pretty much unprepared to any situation and she just flies. And so we're tag teaming and consider us one, but Mary is seeing a patient today, so I'm taking over again. But thank you for letting us the flavor of the day, poor Justin. Well, it's probably better because I'm obsessed with Mary, but you don't even know who's going to show up. Justin's not sure who's going to co-host it, though. It's kind of like a surprise every time we host the show. So thank you. I missed you, and I do love this, and I'm excited for our guest today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back on the podcast as my partner in crime. But man, Mary, she's a rock star. So Mary, if you're listening to this, we miss you this week. Looking forward to having you back on the podcast soon. Well, let's go ahead and transition to our guest today. So I'm really excited to be talking with a couple of people from Rarus Med. So Isabelle Vacher is here with us as the founder of Rarus Med, and we also have Tate here, who has some public health focus, experience, and a unique personal story, I think, that really flows into why she's so passionate about the work that's being done at Rarus Med. So, Isabelle, thank you so much for joining us. Dana, we thank you as well. And I'm just going to kick it off by letting the two of you tell us a bit about what you do at Rarus Med and maybe the story behind it. So, Isabelle, do you mind maybe kicking us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We are so excited to be here and just love and adore Perfecting Peds and love Mary and Jenna and are just thrilled to participate today. I'm going to tell you a little bit, maybe we could start with what inspired the creation of Rarus Med. And it's an important story because it's deeply personal. My journey with rare disease began when my oldest daughter suffered a catastrophic stroke in 2019. It was an event that could have been prevented, had a rare genetic mutation been identified, when she experienced an earlier, more minor stroke a decade prior. Then in 2023, my youngest daughter was diagnosed with eosinophilic esophagitis, which is another rare disease, after a lifetime of dismissed symptoms. And I found myself at a crossroads. Despite having 10 years of nursing experience and more than 30 years in medical and patient education, I found myself lost and alone and terrified. And surprised that I was in such a place with all that kind of a background. I think as healthcare providers, we always know that no family should have to navigate these kinds of challenges alone, whether it's rare disease or not. We know that. But, the lived experience. Through that lived experience, I came to understand the full depth of that truth in a way that surprised me. The isolation, the fear, the helplessness that came when the right knowledge and support aren't there. And I know how to get support, with my background, and I couldn't find it. I know now more than ever that education, when it's designed with purpose and compassion, has the power to transform lives, improve patient outcomes, and even prevent tragedies like the ones my family endured and many others. And it was through these experiences that Rarus Med began to take shape. And I officially launched the company. I can't even believe it. It was just a year ago on Rare Disease Day 2024. So,
wow.
I took a leap of faith and jumped. We call it an educational ecosystem. And it embodies my unique perspective as a nurse and an educator, but most importantly, a mother who's navigated the complexities of rare diseases firsthand. This lived experience really fuels my personal commitment to transforming rare disease education by ensuring that healthcare providers, patients, and families have access to the knowledge, resources, and support that we're missing in our journey. And I would love to turn it over to Dana here to talk a little bit about what the unique needs are in the rare disease community that we're aiming to address. So Dana, would you mind taking that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rarus Med is kind of built as a holistic educational ecosystem. Kind of Isabelle touched on that a little bit. So we have Rarus CE, which provides cutting edge, interactive, continuing education for clinicians. And then we have RarusGalaxy, which is a dynamic platform designed for patients and families. Anyone with rare disease kind of knows that rare disease education has long suffered from a kind of one size fits all approach, and it kind of fails to address any diverse learning needs. And there's a lot of systemic barriers and accessibility gaps. So Rarus Med was created to change that. We bridge the gap, or we're trying to bridge the gap between clinicians who need specialized evidence-based knowledge and then the patients and families that are seeking understandable, actionable education. So what Rarus does is we ensure that learning is not just informative, but transformative. So through our innovative multi-channel education, we are trying to empower every stakeholder in the rare disease space. So we're trying to meet them where they are and equipping them with that knowledge they need to navigate such complex conditions with confidence.
That's amazing. Thank you. And I will share, which I often don't talk about, because it's confusing when one of your loved ones get these diagnoses, and I don't even, you don't even know what to make of it. So my now 8-year-old last year started randomly shaking, just her one hand, and it honestly looked like Parkinson's. And so they called me from school. The first time I thought, okay, this is weird. Her hand's just tired. But it wouldn't stop. So then I was like, oh my God, what if this is a seizure? What if this is neurologic disorder? So I took her to the ER to get, the $1 million workup for us to walk away with no answer. So they knew it wasn't a stroke. They did an EEG to rule out seizures, many, many MRIs for us to get the diagnosis of benign essential tremor. And of course, just like Justin, I've focused in neurology, and I was like, I've never seen a kid with a benign essential tremor, and what are you supposed to do with it? If you Google it and look it up for adults, like one of the diagnoses or one of the treatments, which is I teased her, is you drink alcohol and see if it breaks. So I was teasing my 8-year-old, like, you want a glass of wine? And we're like, okay, well, that's going to work. So that's out. And then you start looking at the other meds that they have available for benign essential tremors in the adult population, and they don't even like the thought of putting my kid on blood pressure meds when her blood pressure is already low, and it could cause exercise fatigue, and she's huge in her activities, or it was other anti-epileptics. So as a lost mom, I reviewed her labs and realized that her magnesium was slightly low, and that could cause like some sort of tremors. I started supplementing magnesium, it went away. The neurologist told me I was crazy. I took the magnesium off, the tremors came back. Put the magnesium back on, they went away. And again, I'm a pharmacist and a pediatric pharmacist and a neurology pharmacist. And because this is so rare, I don't even know what to do with that experience, with that knowledge, with again, she's the N of very small in the US. And actually I don't actually really talk about it because I don't even know what to make of it. But so thank you for what you guys are doing, because there's caregivers, and even as a provider and a pharmacist, I'm like, I don't know, was that a fluke? Was that helpful? And so what you guys are doing is truly amazing, and I absolutely love that. So can you guys tell us how this differs than your traditional CE medical education, both from a provider's and a caregiver's perspective?
Oh, I would love to answer that question, Jenna. And this is really kind of bringing the full weight of all of the knowledge that I've accumulated over 30 years working in the CME space and the patient education space, and, trying to always stay ahead of the curve with what's happening in education. And, it's getting better, but traditional medical education can be extremely boring. It's often lecture-based, passive, designed for common conditions. But, rare diseases, and I would argue really all of medical education, but especially for rare diseases, requires a fundamentally different approach. It demands critical thinking, early suspicion, multidisciplinary perspectives. So at Rarus Med, we've tried to flip the traditional model by using what we, again, consider an educational ecosystem. It's evolving, but our foundation approach is we marry virtual clinics that put HCPs into real-world diagnostic and treatment scenarios with mini documentaries that integrate patient voices directly into learning, as well as gamified learning for patients and families. These three pieces always exist together. We never do them in silos. So you will never find a virtual clinic without that tie into the patient, and vice versa. And not only that, we take the patient who has whichever rare disease we are focusing on, and they are integrated into the virtual clinics as well for the HCP education. So there is this back and forth between a faculty that includes healthcare provider experts and a patient or patients with the disease. We just finished a program in idiopathic hypersomnia, and our patient voice is amazing. We're working on hereditary angioedema right now, and amazing faculty, and a mother and a daughter are part of the faculty who both have HAE. So we really have this, again, looking at it from a holistic rather than a siloed perspective. One of the things we're working on, I think that's very different, but it is an important part of our plan, is adaptive intelligence-driven learning that personalizes education in real time. I don't think you can turn a page without seeing AI, right? But we're really exploring what we call emergent intelligence, which is a more dynamic and evolving model designed specifically for rare disease education. The goal is to create a system that not only personalizes learning in real time, but also adapts based on new discoveries and patient insights and clinical engagement. So, our philosophy is it's not just about memorizing guidelines. It's about changing how providers diagnose, treat, and engage with rare disease patients, and vice versa. So that's where we are with our Rarus Med focus.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Being an educator, I'm soaking so much of this up. There's a lot that we need to learn about taking our current approach to education and adapting that really to our learner in a way that fosters change and not just knowledge transactional type of approaches to learning, right? So what you're doing is amazing. I'd love to step back just a little bit for our listeners. For us, Jenna and I are peds. We're used to rare disease kiddos all the time. But maybe we could define for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar, what qualifies as a rare disease? And can you give us some examples of those that you have created some educational tools for?
Yes, absolutely. So it's interesting. I like this question because even when we started Rarus Med, EOE was considered a rare disease. The latest is that because there's more attention and understanding around EOE, it's kind of moved out of the ranks of rare disease. So, is a disease really rare? Or have we just not had enough optics on it? There are, definitions of what a rare disease is, but again, that can change with just more understanding and education. With EOE, we didn't have any treatments. We still have no treatments for what is going on with my daughter. But we then, we Dupixent, it came onto the scene and finally gave patients a treatment option, and more people started learning about it. And now it's slowly moving off we're identifying more, a lot more EOE than we ever thought was there. So, I think we have to keep that in mind. And we focus on, because we only launched a year ago, we have our two major programs that are under our belt with more to come. As I mentioned, one is idiopathic hypersomnia, and the other is hereditary angioedema. From a focus perspective, I concentrate on all the rare diseases and disorders that are currently categorized as rare, and there are hundreds of them. But I just think the question is so important because we have to keep in mind, is it really as rare as we think it is?
Right.
Yeah.
Even I'm thinking back personally to when, back in the day, quote unquote, I have celiacs, right? And so nobody talked about that. And my mom was like, I didn't even think to test you. I just thought you're, 4'11", barely 5 foot. And that's just you were negative 5 percentile. And that was how your things were supposed to be. And so I'm like, Mom, I don't understand how you missed this. She's just like, nobody ever talked about it. So, yeah. And it wasn't, so I can totally see how you're right. It changes over time. What are some of your biggest challenges in the rare disease education and advocacy space?
Ooh, I would love to grab that one.
This is her soapbox, everybody. Get ready.
Yes.
We're ready.
So one of the biggest barriers is diagnostic delay. I have so much personal experience with that, but I won't go. We'd be here for the next 4 hours. But many rare diseases take years to identify because providers lack exposure to them, kind of piggybacking off of what Isabelle was kind of just saying. Another major issue is fragmented information. So patients are struggling to find trustworthy resources, and then clinicians often lack access to the latest treatment advances. So RarusGalaxy, what we're doing, we're trying to solve that by connecting patients, families, and HCPs through shared learning experiences and integrating patient storytelling into medical education so that providers learn the human impact alongside the science.
Love that.
And then, offering tailored learning paths. So whether you're a newly diagnosed patient, a caregiver, or a specialist, you can get that information and that it's clear and relevant and actionable. So one of the most important aspects to me is that patients aren't just included, they're faculty in our programs. We elevate patient voices as educators, not just in case studies, so that we can ensure that medical education is built alongside the people that it impacts most.
Absolutely. And I would say another, I think there's a lot of challenges and we probably would need a whole podcast on it, but beyond the misdiagnosis is another major challenge is continued support beyond the diagnosis. So, so many families fight for years to get that rare disease diagnosis and then they get it and they are still lost. A lot of times, clear treatment pathways or long-term management strategies. Education doesn't just stop at diagnosis. It really has to evolve with the patient's journey. And I think we have to sustaining education through treatment, clinical trials, and emerging therapies, because rare disease diagnosis is just the beginning. Bridging the gap between advocacy and action, ensuring that research, funding, and policy changes translate into real-world solutions for patients and families, and providing clarity on medication access, safety, and management. Jenna, I'm sure that one really resonates with you, especially for pediatric patients where dosing guidelines are often unclear, or they're just non-existent. So I think that's why, platforms like RarusGalaxy and others, we don't want to own this space. We're not competitors. We want everybody to kind of move and evolve together. I think we all have to, it's not just education that we're doing. We're empowering families with ongoing evolving support. That's such a huge piece of perfecting peds. And they don't just inform providers, they equip them to act confidently and compassionately in a space where hesitation could mean the difference between life and death.
Isabelle, one thing that strikes me as you're talking about this is that busy clinicians often don't have the time, even if they have all the resources, to provide great patient education, because rare diseases impact more than just the medical side of things. But you guys are looking at this holistically. You're looking at not only the journey to diagnosis, but what do they need to do to treat and manage the condition and the symptoms that go along with it? Are there daily life challenges and things in diet that need to change? What about the emotional health aspects? You're getting all of that. And so I just want to reiterate the point that this, I love that you say this isn't a competition, right? This is an opportunity for collaboration. And
Yes.
Even looking at what Jenna and her team at Perfecting Peds are doing, they spend a lot of time with these families. They still don't have all the time they need to fully educate these families that are struggling with managing a child with a rare disease. And so the more we can partner and create that ecosystem, as you said, the better off we're going to be. So I love that you guys are taking that approach. Maybe if we could talk about one of those aspects of holistic care a little bit, I'd love to just hear about how you approach this in your education. So let's talk about some of the daily life challenges like diet and nutrition. What are some of the ways that you go about providing high quality education to families who maybe have to make some of those lifestyle changes to help support their family?
Oh, I love that question, Justin. and I want to say thank you for I think the root of so many problems are the working in silos mentality and then the us versus them mentality. And we absolutely do not want to do that at RarusMed. Hence this collaboration, even with Perfecting Peds in so many ways, because I can reach out to the communities that I've built over the past 30 years, but I think it's important to reach out beyond too. So I just wanted to say thank you for saying that again. So you asked about how do we approach that from a wider perspective, a more holistic perspective. And so, Justin, we try to do that in our patient, on the patient side with our mini documentaries and our games. You will see a very broad holistic treatment of topics where we talk about diet and we talk about exercise from our patient's perspective. What did you do? What were your challenges? What kind of adjustments did you make? How did this work for you? Dana could talk forever on this with the adjustment that she's had to make in her life. But we're very careful to address that more holistic overview, not just talk about treatments, pharmacological treatments, but much broader take. And we also try to end, particularly our mini documentaries, with words of hope, because sometimes there are no ultimate answers. It's just the recognition that, hey, I'm not alone. And that can mean everything. So we do that in our patient education in both the mini documentaries and the educational game, which is really fun, by the way. You gotta try our climbing Bigfoot mountain for IH. But on the on the HCP side, the Rarus CE side, where we're doing the virtual clinics, we also broaden those discussions to incorporate pieces like that. That's why we have, for example, our HAE program. One of our faculty members is Mary Young. She is providing the pharmacist voice in this interdisciplinary discussion on HAE. So it's bringing, again, it's thinking outside the silos, outside the boxes, and we're all going to be patients, or we all have been patients. I'm sure probably everybody on this call has been a patient. We got to think back like we're patients, not just clinicians.
Yeah, I agree, because it's humbling when you're the patient, and even more humbling for me when I'm very quick to spew out to parents with little anxiety what meds we should do, what meds we should give, and what we should do. And then when it's my own kids, I'm freaking out. So it's like, I'm like, what? What's the dose of Benadryl or Tate? Like, you just completely, you can't even. It's just such a different experience when you're on the other side of the table. That's for sure. In your experience, this is going to be a little bit selfish of a question, but how can healthcare providers, especially us pharmacists, improve the way they engage with families of children with rare diseases? What clinical pearls do you have? Because our primary listeners are pharmacists.
Oh, yes, my dear pharmacists, you are so incredibly important and more than what most people understand, number one. And I think we have to get that out, that word out. Pharmacists are not just dispensing medication, so there's a lot of education that we can do there about the more holistic, wider role of the pharmacist. But, just to take it to specifically the pharmacists in rare disease, pharmacists play a critical role in rare disease care, often more than most people realize, as I mentioned. But in many cases, they're the last line of defense between a patient and an avoidable medication error. Yet rare disease often prevents unique challenges that require a different approach to engagement. So here's my take on, how pharmacists make a difference. Recognize that rare disease medications aren't always straightforward. Many rare disease treatments involve off-label use, compounded medications, gene or enzyme therapy, specialized dosing. The pharmacist must be proactive in learning about these treatments rather than assuming that standard protocols apply. And my pharmacist on the call, jump in and correct me if you disagree, because I am not a pharmacist. Being an active partner in medication management, I should probably just turn that over to Jenna, but families often feel isolated when it comes to treatment decisions, and pharmacists can bridge this gap by offering education on administration, potential interactions, alternative formulations, being the core of shared decision making. Especially for pediatric patients, they may need liquid suspensions or weight-based dosing adjustments or specialty pharmacy coordination. That is it's incredibly a critical role, empowering families with clear, compassionate guidance. Many rare disease parents feel dismissed, even if you feel like, oh, wow, I know everything, I know it all. Trust me, we don't. Many rare disease parents can feel dismissed when they ask questions or concerns. Pharmacists can change that. They can validate their experiences. They can ensure that instructions are clear and accessible. They can take the time to check for potential roadblocks, things like insurance issues, prior authorization requirements, specialty pharmacy delays that can completely sideline a patient and impact outcomes. I think this kind of is a full circle into why I have been so engaged and interested and excited for what Perfecting Peds is doing, because, Perfecting Peds kind of serves as that model. Sorry, Jen, Jenna didn't talk, and I didn't talk about this beforehand. I really, honestly.
No, we did it. I promise we did it.
Perfecting Peds, they're the champions for pediatric medication management. And that's in rare disease and outside rare disease, for complex patients. We need more pharmacy professionals who understand how critical their role is in supporting families. The right medication, the right form at the right time, that can mean everything.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I was trying to look to see how common this is, but I had a real life example this week. One of my patients had, and I might butcher how this is actually stated, but it's Smith Lemley Apathy syndrome. Okay, how do we say it?
I do not know. I have never heard
Justin,
of that. Jen.
You've heard of it before?
I have not.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I believe it's Smith Lemley Opitz, if I understand it correctly. Yeah.
Yep. And so I'm like, but it's always humbling. And actually, I find that there's the most room for a pharmacist in these types of situations, or we always have to stay curious, right? Because I'm like, one, I've never heard of this disease. So the first thing I do, and I would love your critique on this, is usually I try to find, they usually have national organizations for that disease that house the most important knowledge. So like there's usually a foundation where they collectively are doing different research or are at least putting the most innovative tips and tricks in. So the one thing when I was reading about it, it can cause your cholesterol to be low, but then a persecutor of it, I don't want to completely butcher it, and it's only 1 in 20,000 people in the world have it, but it's your dehydroxycholesterol is super elevated. And so, but they almost present like the autistic population or an autism, I feel like that shouldn't be a rare disease, but by golly it is. We don't know enough about it. But like they started him on an antipsychotic, and I'm reading and I'm like, you can't use an antipsychotic in this disease because it's actually going to make the 7-dehydroxycholesterol higher and can put them at risk of cardiovascular issues. And so I feel like, again, you're not going to know it all, but I think trying to find those like foundations or those there's people, even if it's like I've seen 1 in 25 diseases or 1 in 50, like the foundation, and try to educate yourself on the origin of the disease, as well as anyone who can give you clinical pearls that came before you, because that was just a real live example where like our healthcare providers can be so instrumental if we stay curious in all the disease states that are rare. So I just wanted to provide one real life example, and next time I'll know how to pronounce it, Justin. That was when the mom told me, and I'm honest with parents, the grandmom told me, I was like, I don't know what that is. I'm going to have to read about this. She's like, okay. And then I came back the next time. It was like, we have to get them off the antipsychotic and on something else. So I think there's always opportunities if we stay curious in these things. And we have a long way to go, that's for sure.
Gosh, Jenna, that kind of gave me chills, because I think that what you did was, exactly what we all need to be doing. It's about admitting when we don't know for sure, but it's about taking the time to dig further, taking the time to kind of feel the spaces in between, if you know what I mean, rather than just kind of going, this is what I know, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I know, and this is what I'm going to do. Your curiosity and your intelligence and your compassion really drove you to dive deeper, maybe than someone else might not have done, right? I can think of tons of examples of that. So yes, I think that what you did was the example of what any healthcare provider should do. I'll give you one of mine. My daughter had a stroke 10 years ago. They did testing. She was in the hospital, et cetera, et cetera. They ultimately just, they said this is probably birth control pills. So in 2019, my daughter's had a catastrophic stroke that has left her handicapped. We were in the ICU neuro ICU for a month. She was in a coma. A hematologist who was on staff at Vacher in St. Petersburg said, everything's coming up, her tests all look fine. I'm seeing like nothing. I have no idea. He said, I had about, 20 years ago, I had a mentor, and we had a patient come in, a young woman who had a massive heart attack, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And my mentor said, let's test her for this genetic mutation. And he said, I'm going to test Kaylee for this genetic mutation. Sure enough, it came back that she has a plasminogen activator inhibitor 4G mutation, which causes thrombophilia. When she was admitted to the hospital for the second stroke, she had clots in her legs, her lungs, her carotid arteries.
Wow.
And it was, we finally had a diagnosis, but it took, that example of what I just provided with this physician is exactly what you did for that patient.
Thank you. My CFO doesn't like how long it takes you to work up patients, but that's for another story. Because I get I get so curious and go down the biggest rabbit holes, but I think they sincerely are so important.
The curiosity and the rabbit holes are where the answers lie.
Yes, that is very, very, very true. I'm going to ask a question to Dana now. Dana, for the RarusGalaxy's content, how do you make sure that it's both engaging and accessible to many diverse audiences?
I'm so sorry, my internet, I only heard like half of that question. It's okay. Been going in and out. I'm so sorry.
We'll edit it out, so don't worry about it.
That's right. That's the beauty of doing recorded podcasts.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So we'll all just take like a 5-second pause, and then I'll re-ask the question.
Perfect. Yeah, it seems to be happy right now, but if it cuts out again, I'm so sorry.
It's been happening to me all day. So we'll do 5-second pause. Okay, so this question's for Dana. Dana, I want to know, how do you ensure that RarusGalaxy's content is both engaging but also accessible to diverse audiences?
Oh, yes. So making rare disease education engaging isn't just about simplifying information. It's, again, meeting people where they are and recognizing the barriers they face and designing our content so that it feels relevant, usable, and empowering. So at Rarus, I like to follow 3 core principles to achieve that. So I always have a cultural and health literacy sensitivity, so that rare disease education, it has to be both scientifically accurate and inclusive. Also using a multi-module learning for different audiences, because not everyone learns the same way. And rare disease education has to be dynamic to be effective. So again, incorporating the many documentaries and our games and interactive learning tools like decision trees and symptom trackers and personalized resource hubs, just trying to help patients and families apply what they've learned to their real life situation. And then also community-driven design. So I believe, and I think everyone on the Rarus team believes, that education is most powerful when it's co-created with the people that it serves. So the patients and caregivers are not passive recipients. They are faculty collaborators and advisors when we're building our resources. So co-developing these educational tools with the patients and caregivers and advocacy groups to ensure that the content is real and relatable and truly useful. That's kind of what we're all about.
Yeah, I love that. We need to customize that more to people. I think back to a story of when I felt like families felt the impact of the time I took to educate them. One of the biggest times was often we'd be on inpatient rounds and the families would be thrown, well, we could do these 5 things and here's what we're going to do. And then you couldn't tell as a caregiver, as a member of that team, wow, that was overwhelming to the family. And so for me, some of the most rewarding times were when I paused and went back to the family to say, hey, my name's Justin. I'm your pharmacist. I know we just talked about a bunch of things. I'd love to give you time to process, but could I come back and maybe we could answer more questions that you have later on? And just taking that time made such an impact in that patient and that family's life, and impactful for me too, to see how grateful they were for it. And you guys are taking that another step. In that moment, all I had was my knowledge and maybe some handouts and other things that maybe I found very quickly to go and educate the patient. But you guys are providing this immersive approach that balances not only being clear, but comprehensive. Not just being concise, but also compassionate, right? And you're bringing all that together. And I'm excited to see how you guys continue to innovate in this. And I think there's a lot that we can learn as healthcare providers from you. So I'd love to know, as we kind of transition toward the end of the podcast, what things excite you most about the work that you're doing right now at Rarus Med? Things that you're working on, what keeps you going every day, and what are you excited most about? So Isabelle, I'll start with you.
Well, what excites me most? We want to be part of, and I'm saying part of, reshaping how the world learns about and responds to rare diseases. Not just by increasing awareness, but by creating a fundamental shift in how rare disease education is delivered and accessed and applied in real world care. That feels it drives me every day. We don't just want people to know more about rare diseases. We want them to make faster, better, and more compassionate decisions. Justin, back to what you said about compassion, because I firmly believe it's all about compassion. So the nuts and bolts of that, sustaining education and research is something that is incredibly important to me and to many others. The traditional medical education is not really keeping up with that, with the knowledge evolution. So we want to be part of, in our small way with education, the integrating research, helping healthcare providers and patients using technology. We are very, very immersed in our next iteration of what RarusMed will look like. So that really drives me. One thing that's very near and dear to me is expanding access in underrepresented communities. I've done a lot of work there in past lives far before RarusMed. Rare disease care is not equitable. It's not. Rural communities, lower income families, underserved populations. It's bad enough having there's a lot of barriers having a rare disease, and if you're part of an unrepresented community, you just face greater barriers to diagnosis and treatment. So, working on ways to translate and localize content and develop things like ours, to really reach every patient everywhere and do some part in creating more equitable care. I'm, as I said, very, very invested in advancing intelligence-driven learning. I don't like to call it AI. It's calling it EI as a next-generation approach to adaptive real-time education, to do so many things there that we just can't do now. Just driving systemic change, policy reforms, partnering, like this with pharmacists and just the whole rare disease ecosystem of constituents. Those are some of the things that I'm really excited about.
Dana, but what about you? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, so just for me specifically working at Rarus, what excites me most is just working with our patients, especially on the mini documentary and games. I think I've never seen anything like that. And as someone with a rare disease, being able to connect with the patients we've worked with, even though we might not have the same rare disease, it still already feels like a community. So just further building our community through these mini docs and our games is just so lovely to see, and kind of just talking with people with other rare diseases. Community is everything. And just on a personal side, when I got my diagnosis, I just got my diagnosis. I didn't get any kind of help from my doctors or anyone really. And I honestly found a tiny community on TikTok of all places. And that's even where I found out how to give myself my injection, because I had never been given a medication that was an injection before. So making these communities and showing an everyday life is just so important to me as someone with a rare disease. And I'm just so excited that we're able to do this at Rarus and keep building and showing that you can still live a normal life with a rare disease, and it's not all so bad. And just showing that. And then again with gaming, creating games that, I think I'm kind of someone, I'm a millennial and I'm not a gamer, but every single other person I know is a gamer. So being able to create these games where people can interact, and like if they're not so big on watching a documentary or they don't want to get education in a more traditional sense, they can play a game and feel like they can understand their own diagnosis better. I think it's just so exciting, and I just love it so much.
Well, thank you guys. It's truly been a pleasure. We genuinely appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being on the Pediatric Podcast in Review. Last question I would love to ask, if someone wants to get a hold of you, where should they go?
Yeah. Well, if they go to RarusMed, www.RarusMed.com, you can find out a lot about us, and there are also contact numbers for us, and you can even see our, again, we've only been here a year, so we do have our hereditary angioedema program. That is, all the different pieces are linked on the site. We will be launching HAE, the initiatives for HAE, very soon, and we just keep going, and we love to hear from anybody and everybody. So reach out to us. We will respond immediately.
And also on social media, just at Rarus, RARUS, Med, MED. We are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. We're literally everywhere. You can find us on any platform. We're there.
I love that. Well, thank you, ladies. It's always a pleasure, and we genuinely appreciate your time.
We do as well. So wonderful to meet you all and talk.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening, and remember to subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review.